Wealthy CEO asked for her body, but his virgin surrogate innocence made him ask for her heart instead. Grant Whitmore paid $500,000 for a virgin surrogate, expecting silence and submission. What he got instead was a woman who made him question everything he thought he knew about control, desire, and love. She disappeared the night before their contract was complete, taking his unborn child and leaving behind only a video that shattered his world. Have you ever paid for something you thought you wanted, only to discover you've been searching for something completely different? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. Grant Whitmore paid $500,000 for a virgin surrogate, expecting silence and submission. What he got instead was a woman who made him question everything he thought he knew about control, desire, and love. She disappeared the night before their contract was complete, taking his unborn child and leaving behind only a video that shattered his world. Have you ever paid for something you thought you wanted, only to discover you'd been searching for something completely different? Have you ever met someone who changed you just by refusing to be impressed by you? Someone who saw through your walls before you even knew they existed? This is the story of a man who thought money could buy him legacy, and a woman who taught him the difference between possession and partnership. What happens when the thing you're paying for becomes the one thing you can't afford to lose? Hit that subscribe button, because this story will challenge everything you think you know about love, power, and what it really means to give someone your heart. Let me take you back to Dallas, Texas, 2021, where Grant Whitmore was about to make the biggest mistake and the best decision of his life. He signed a surrogacy contract like a business deal, clinical, calculated, emotionless. He had no idea he was about to meet the one woman who would make him feel everything. The consultation room gleamed with marble and chrome, where even the silence felt expensive. Grant reviewed her file like a stock report. 24, no sexual history, nursing student, perfect candidate for his purposes. After his ex-fiancée leaked his fertility struggles to every gossip blog in Texas, he needed control. Complete control. The door opened, and everything changed. She walked in wearing a simple blue dress that probably cost less than his lunch, but she carried herself like royalty. Dark skin glowed under the harsh medical lighting. Her eyes met his without flinching, without the usual flutter of recognition that came with his name and net worth. Mr. Whitmore. Her voice was steady, professional. I'm Mariah Monroe. Grant had expected nervousness, maybe some gold-digging excitement. What he got was composure that made him sit up straighter. She settled into the chair across from him, hands folded, waiting. You understand the terms? He slid the contract across the polished table. Full medical supervision. Living arrangements on my property. Complete discretion. I understand you need an heir. She didn't touch the papers. And I need my mother's medical bills paid. We both get what we want. But when she reached for the pen, their fingers brushed. The contact lasted maybe 2 seconds. Long enough for heat to shoot up his arm. Long enough for him to notice how her breath caught slightly. Long enough to realize this wasn't going to be as simple as he'd planned. She signed her name in careful script. He watched her lips press together in concentration. Noticed the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Details he had no business noticing about a business arrangement. The medical procedures begin next week, he said, struggling to sound professional while his pulse hammered. You'll move to the estate this weekend. She nodded, gathering her purse. At the door, she paused. Mr. Whitmore, I hope you find what you're really looking for. The words hit him like cold water. How could she possibly know he wasn't even sure what that was anymore? Have you ever judged someone based on their circumstances, only to realize you completely misread them? Drop a comment about your most wrong first impression. As she signed the final page, she looked up and said quietly, Mr. Whitmore, I hope you find what you're really looking for. He had no idea she already knew it wasn't a baby. She was supposed to live quietly in his guest house for 9 months. Instead, she turned his perfectly ordered world completely upside down in just 3 days. The guest house sat like a jewel behind the main estate, all glass and clean lines, designed for isolation. But within hours, she made it feel warm. Flowers from the garden, books stacked on tables, her nursing textbooks spread across the kitchen counter. Grant watched from his office window as she helped Mrs. Chun, his housekeeper, carry groceries. Nobody helped Mrs. Chun. She'd worked for his family 15 years and intimidated everyone, including him. But there was Araya, laughing at something the older woman said, completely natural. "She's different," his father wheezed from the doorway. At 78, Richard Whitmore rarely left his wing of the house, but apparently Araya had drawn him out too. "Different how?" "She fixed my medication schedule. Noticed I was taking the blood thinner too close to the cholesterol pills. Could have killed me." His father's eyes held approval Grant hadn't seen in years. "Smart girl. Kind too." That evening, Grant found her on the main house terrace, reading his latest business proposal. His private business proposal that shouldn't have been anywhere near the guest house. Interesting reading. He tried to sound casual, not like his heart was racing from watching her concentrate. She looked up, completely unashamed of being caught. "Your expansion into Birmingham makes sense financially, but you're missing the emotional hook." Emotional hook? People don't choose hotels based on thread count and marble bathrooms. They choose based on how a place makes them feel. She tapped the papers with her pen. She'd been making notes in the margins. "Your proposal reads like a spreadsheet. Where's the story?" Grant stared at her. Harvard MBAs paid thousands for that kind of insight, and she just handed it to him over stolen business documents like it was obvious. "Why are you reading my private files?" "Mrs. Chun asked me to bring you coffee. I saw the papers on your desk and got curious." "No apology. No guilt. Just honesty. Besides, if I'm going to live here 9 months, I figured I should know what kind of man I'm dealing with." The way she said it, straightforward, no games, made something twist in his chest. When was the last time someone had spoken to him without an agenda? "And what kind of man am I?" She studied his face in the dying light, those dark eyes seeing too much. The kind who thinks business is safer than people, who builds walls with money and control because someone hurt you badly enough that vulnerability feels like weakness. The accuracy of it knocked the breath from his lungs. When was the last time someone surprised you by caring about the people you thought no one noticed? Share a story about unexpected kindness in the comments. That night, Grant found her on the terrace reading his business proposal, making notes in the margins. "You know," she said without looking up, "your numbers are perfect, but your heart isn't in any of this, is it?" The question hit him like a physical blow. He decided to test her loyalty with an inappropriate request. Her response didn't just surprise him. It completely dismantled his assumptions about power, money, and what makes someone truly strong. 3 days later, Grant decided to remind them both what this arrangement really was. She wasn't a house guest or a friend. She was hired help, and it was time she understood that. "I'm having dinner with some investors tonight," he told her that afternoon. "I'd like you to join us." She looked up from her textbook, surprised. "That's not part of our agreement." "I'm making it part of our agreement." He kept his voice cold, businesslike. "We're something appropriate. Something that shows you understand your role here." The words tasted wrong in his mouth, but he needed distance. Needed to stop noticing how she hummed while she cooked, or the way she'd started leaving little notes for Mrs. Chun in broken Mandarin that made the housekeeper smile. Araya set down her pen slowly. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "I'm asking you to dress like a woman who's grateful for my generosity. Something that makes it clear you appreciate your position in this house." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. She stood up, and for a moment he thought he'd won. She'd submit, prove that everyone had a price, and he could go back to seeing her as a business transaction. Instead, she looked him dead in the eye. "I'm not for sale, Mr. Whitmore. I'm here to give life, not lose mine." The words hit him like a slap. Not because she was angry. She wasn't. Her voice stayed calm, steady, but something in her tone made him feel smaller than he had since he was 12 years old and his mother caught him lying. "You signed a contract to carry your child, not to be your entertainment." She moved closer, and despite being 8 inches shorter, she somehow seemed to tower over him. "I'll attend your dinner because you asked. I'll wear something nice because I respect your home. But I won't dress like a woman who owes you anything beyond what we agreed to in writing." She walked toward the door, then paused without turning around. "And Mr. Whitmore, if you ever try to make me feel cheap again, I'll pack my bags tonight. Money doesn't buy dignity. It never has." The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like thunder. Grant stood alone in his kitchen, shaking. Not from anger, from something he hadn't felt in years. Shame. And underneath that, something even more dangerous. Respect for someone who couldn't be bought. Have you ever had to set a boundary with someone who thought their money or position meant they could cross your lines? How did you handle it? Tell me in the comments. As she walked away, Grant felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Respect for someone who couldn't be bought. And for the first time since his mother died, he wondered what it would feel like to earn someone's genuine affection instead of purchasing their compliance. She found him having a panic attack at 3 a.m., and instead of calling for help or running away, she did something that changed everything. She stayed. Grant's insomnia had gotten worse since Araya moved in. He'd catch himself watching for her light to come on in the guest house, listening for the sound of her moving around. Tonight was different. Tonight, the familiar tightness in his chest had turned into something that felt like drowning. He'd locked himself in his home office with a bottle of bourbon and quarterly reports that blurred together into meaningless numbers. His hands shook as he stared at the framed photo on his desk. His mother, taken 6 months before the cancer killed her. Before his father shut down emotionally and left 12-year-old Grant to figure out grief alone. The knock on his door was so soft he almost missed it. "Mr. Whitmore?" Araya's voice, concerned but not panicked. "I saw your light. Are you okay?" He should have told her to leave, should have maintained the distance between them. Instead, he heard himself say, "Come in." She entered wearing simple pajamas and a robe, her hair in a silk scarf that made her look younger. She took one look at his face and crossed the room without hesitation. "When did you last sleep?" She didn't wait for permission, just settled into the chair beside his desk. "When did you last let someone take care of you?" The questions were too honest, too close to wounds he'd kept bandaged for years. "I don't need." "When did she die?" Araya nodded toward the photo. "Your mother." Grant's throat closed up. He never talked about this. Not with therapists his father had hired. Not with women he'd dated. Not with anyone. 15 years ago. The words came out hoarse. "Breast cancer. How old were you?" 12. Something shifted in her expression. Not pity, understanding. That's when you learn that loving someone means losing them. The simple truth of it broke something open in his chest. His breathing got shallow, fast. The room started spinning. Araya didn't call for help. Didn't run. She reached for his hands, her touch warm and steady. "Look at me," she said quietly. "Just look at me and breathe." Her thumbs rubbed gentle circles across his knuckles. Her eyes stayed locked on his, anchoring him when everything else felt like it was falling apart. "In through your nose, out through your mouth." That's it. It took maybe 10 minutes for his heartbeat to slow down, for the room to stop tilting. The whole time, she stayed exactly where she was, solid and calm and completely unafraid of his breakdown. "Better?" she asked when he nodded. "Why didn't you leave?" She studied his face like she was memorizing it. "Because someone should have stayed with you when you were 12. Since they didn't, I figure I could stay with you now." The kindness in her voice almost undid him all over again. Have you ever been someone's calm in their storm? Or had someone be yours? What does it mean when someone chooses to stay during your worst moment? She didn't leave until dawn, and when he woke up on the couch with her jacket still draped over his shoulders, Grant realized something terrifying. He wasn't just attracted to her body anymore. He was falling for her heart. The moment she laughed at his terrible joke, Grant knew he was in serious trouble. You can't fake the kind of joy that lights up someone's whole face, and you can't by the way it makes you feel when you're the reason for it. The kitchen had become their neutral ground, where billion-dollar decisions got discussed over coffee and her nursing homework. She'd claimed the breakfast nook as her study space, transforming his sterile morning routine into something that felt dangerously close to domestic bliss. "You're telling me you've never made pancakes?" She looked at him like he'd admitted to never breathing air. "I have staff for that. Staff for pancakes." She shook her head, pulling ingredients from cabinets like she owned the place. "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard." She moved around his kitchen with easy confidence, flour dusting her fingers, hair pulled back in a messy bun. When she reached for something on a high shelf, Grant moved behind her to help. The moment was innocent enough until she turned around and they were suddenly inches apart. Her scent hit him first, something clean and warm, no expensive perfume needed. Just her. Her lips parted slightly, eyes widening as the space between them charged with electricity. Grant. His name on her lips sounded different. Softer. He started to lean down. She started to rise up to meet him. For a heartbeat, the whole world narrowed to the promise of her mouth against his. Then she stepped back, breaking the spell. Not like this. Her voice was breathless but firm. Not while I'm carrying your baby and living in your house. If you want me, it has to be real. The rejection should have stung. Instead, it made him want her more. She wasn't playing games or using her position for leverage. She was protecting both of them from a mistake that could destroy everything. What if I told you this is the most real I've ever felt? The admission slipped out before he could stop it. Her smile was sad and beautiful. Then I'd say you need to prove it after the contract ends. If you still feel the same way, when I'm not legally bound to be here, we'll talk. She turned back to the stove, flipping pancakes like she hadn't just turned his world upside down. But her hands were shaking slightly, and that small sign of affected composure gave him hope. These are terrible, he said after taking a bite, trying to lighten the mood. She laughed, a real surprised sound of delight. They're supposed to be terrible. That's what makes them perfect. The logic made no sense, but somehow he understood exactly what she meant. When someone sets boundaries that protect both of you, even when it's hard, how do you know that's real love? Share your thoughts on what healthy boundaries look like in relationships. What if I told you this is the most real I've ever felt, he whispered, stepping back to respect her space. Then I'd say you need to prove it, she replied, after the contract ends. If you still feel the same way, when I'm not legally bound to be here, we'll talk. Her words should have felt like rejection. Instead, they felt hope. She started asking questions about his ex-fiance's betrayal, and the answer she uncovered would change everything she thought she knew about the man she was falling for. Araya had always been curious. It came with being a nursing student. You learn to ask the right questions, dig deeper when something didn't make sense. And Grant Whitmore didn't make sense. She'd seen the way he flinched when certain topics came up, the careful way he controlled every detail of his life, the panic attacks he thought no one noticed. Someone had done serious damage to this man, and she was starting to suspect she knew who. The estate library became her research headquarters. Floor-to-ceiling books surrounded her as she scrolled through articles on her laptop, piecing together the story the media had told versus what she was learning about the man himself. Hotel, Heirs, Secret Shame. Whitmore's fertility scandal rocks Dallas elite. Billionaire's baby drama exposed. Each headline felt like a knife, and she could imagine how each one had wounded him. But it was the quotes from his ex-fiancée that made her blood boil. Grant always gets what he pays for, Victoria Ashworth had told one reporter. I just never realized how desperate he was to buy a legacy. Another article included a photo of Victoria at some charity gala, looking perfectly composed while discussing Grant's private medical issues like they were entertainment. She took your most private struggle and turned it into a circus, Araya whispered to the empty library. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was realizing how thoroughly Victoria had planned it. The timing of the leak, right before their wedding. The specific details she'd shared about his fertility treatments. The way she'd painted herself as the victim of his obsession with having an heir. Araya was so absorbed in reading that she didn't hear footsteps behind her until Grant's voice made her jump. Find anything interesting? She spun around, laptop screen still glowing with the damning articles. Guilt flooded her face, but underneath it was something fiercer. Protective anger on his behalf. She destroyed you, Araya said quietly, and then she smiled for the cameras while she did it. Grant's jaw tightened. You shouldn't be reading that garbage. No, I should. She stood up, closing the laptop with more force than necessary. Because now I understand why you needed so much control over this process. Why you couldn't trust letting anyone else handle the details. She moved closer, and he didn't step back. She didn't just betray your privacy, Grant. She stole your ability to be vulnerable with anyone ever again. The truth in her words hit him like a physical blow. No one had ever understood that before. They'd focused on the scandal, the embarrassment, the damage to his reputation. But Araya saw what it had cost him emotionally. "I'm not her," she said softly. "I would never hurt you like that." "How do I know?" The question came out raw, desperate. "What does anyone know? Have you ever had someone you trusted betray your deepest vulnerabilities? How do you learn to trust again after that kind of betrayal? Share your experience with rebuilding trust." As she researched deeper, one detail made her blood run cold. A quote from his ex about how Grant always gets what he pays for. The implication was clear, and suddenly Araya wondered, was she just another transaction to him? Or had something real grown between them despite the contract? The conversation that was supposed to clear the air between them instead revealed a truth that neither was prepared to face. They were both falling in love, and the contract was about to become their biggest obstacle. They met in the garden at sunset, surrounded by his mother's roses that bloomed wild and untamed despite the gardener's attempts at control. The metaphor wasn't lost on either of them. Some things grew beautiful precisely because they couldn't be contained. "I know you've been researching my past," Grant said without preamble. "Mrs. Chun told me about the library sessions." Araya didn't deny it. "I needed to understand." "Understand what?" "Why you're so afraid of being seen as human." She sat on the stone bench, patting the space beside her. "Why you think every kindness is a transaction." He remained standing, hands shoved deep in his pockets. Distance was safer. Maybe because in my experience, it usually is. "I'm not her, Grant." "Aren't you?" The words came out sharper than he intended. "You're here because I'm paying you. You're nice to me because I'm providing for your mother's medical care." How is that different? The accusation hung between them like a poison cloud. Araya's face went very still. "You really want to know the difference?" She stood up, closing the space between them. "Victoria took your most private pain and sold it for social currency. I'm carrying your child and haven't told a single person your name." Her voice stayed level, but he could see the hurt building behind her eyes. "She leaked your medical records to magazines. I've been helping your father manage his medications without being asked. She used your vulnerability as a weapon. I held your hand through a panic attack and never mentioned it again." Each comparison hit like a physical blow. Because she was right. About all of it. "I never expected to feel this way about you," he admitted finally. "That's exactly why I can't trust it." Her response was immediate, like she'd been preparing for this conversation. "Unexpected feelings fade, Grant. Contracts don't. What if they don't fade? What if this is the most real thing I've ever experienced?" She looked at him with something that might have been longing. "Then prove it." "Ow!" "In the contract. Choose me over the baby. Prove I'm not just the vessel you're paying to carry your heir." The challenge in her voice was unmistakable. "If you can look me in the eye and tell me you want me more than you want guaranteed custody of your child, then I'll believe your feelings are real." The request hit him like cold water. Everything in him wanted to say yes, to choose her without hesitation. But the fear Victoria had planted ran deeper than desire. "I can't." The admission felt like swallowing glass. "I need to know the baby will be safe, that I won't lose everything again." Araya nodded like she'd expected that answer. "And that's why this will never work. You're not ready to love someone more than you fear losing them." How do you know the difference between genuine feeling and proximity attraction? When someone's feelings change in a situation like this, would you trust it? "Tell me your thoughts." As she started to walk away, he called out, "What would it take for you to believe this is real?" She turned back, hand on her still flat stomach, and said, "In the contract. Choose me over the baby. Prove I'm not just the vessel you're paying to carry your heir." The challenge hung between them like a gauntlet thrown. He had to choose between the child he'd planned for and the woman he'd never expected to love. But what neither of them knew was that someone else was making choices that would destroy them both. Grant's law office felt like a courtroom as he sat across from his attorneys. Contract modifications spread between them like battle plans. Each clause he struck through felt like shedding armor he'd worn for protection. Scary, but necessary. You want to remove the custody provisions entirely? David Kessler, his lead attorney, looked at him like he'd suggested setting money on fire. Grant, this gives her equal parental rights, equal decision-making power. If things go south, they won't. You can't know that. People change, especially when large sums of money are involved. But that was exactly the point. Araya had been around large sums of money for months now, and the only thing she'd asked for was her mother's medical bills. She could have demanded more, could have leveraged his growing feelings for her into additional benefits. Instead, she maintained boundaries that protected them both. Draw up the new contract, Grant said firmly. Full parental rights to both parties. Joint custody, and add a clause terminating all financial obligations if she chooses to leave before the birth. That's financial suicide. That's trust. 2 hours later, he stood outside the guest house with a modified contract in his hands, heart hammering against his ribs. Through the window, he could see Araya at her kitchen table, surrounded by nursing textbooks. The sight of her studying, planning for a future beyond their arrangement, made something warm unfurl in his chest. She opened the door before he could knock. "You look nervous," she observed, stepping aside to let him in. "I made some changes." He set the contract on her table, pushing aside her anatomy book. "To our agreement." She read in silence, her expression carefully neutral. But he caught the moment her breathing changed, the slight widening of her eyes when she reached the custody modifications. "You're giving up legal control," she said quietly. "I'm choosing partnership over power." She looked up at him then, searching his face like she was trying to read his soul. "Why?" "Because you were right. If I can't choose you over my fear, then I don't deserve either one." For a moment, he thought she might cry. Instead, she stood up and kissed him. It wasn't gentle or hesitant like their almost kiss in the kitchen. This was urgent, desperate, months of careful distance finally giving way to honest desire. Her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer as his arms came around her waist. She tasted like hope and possibility and everything he'd been afraid to want. They broke apart, breathing hard, foreheads pressed together. "This changes everything," she whispered. "I know." Her phone buzzed on the table between them. An unknown number. She glanced at the screen and went very still. "What is it?" She looked up at him with confusion and the first hints of fear. "Someone wants to meet with me. Says they have information about you that I need to hear." The message was simple but chilling. Ask him about the custody clause he didn't remove. Ask him what happens to you after the baby comes. Grant felt the blood drain from his face. There was only one person who knew enough about their arrangement to send that message. Only one person who would want to destroy what they were building. Victoria. When someone changes the rules of your relationship to prove they choose you, how do you know if it's genuine or manipulation? What red flags would you look for? The modified contract sat on the table between them, his signature already there, waiting for hers. But as she reached for the pen, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Ask him about the custody clause he didn't remove. Ask him what happens to you after the baby comes. Her hand froze over the document. The anonymous messages started small, little questions that planted doubt like poison seeds. By the time Araya realized someone was playing games with her heart, the damage was already growing. The first text came on a Tuesday morning while she reviewed her nursing notes at the kitchen table. Unknown number. Simple message. Has he told you about the dinner meetings? She stared at the screen, coffee growing cold in her hands. What dinner meetings? Grant mentioned business obligations, late evenings at the office, but never specific dinners. Her thumb hovered over the delete button. Then another message arrived. Check his calendar app. Password is his mother's birthday. The guest house that had felt like sanctuary now felt like isolation. Every ping of her phone made her flinch, every message from unknown numbers adding another layer of suspicion to what it felt like growing love. She found herself watching Grant differently during their shared meals, studying his face for signs of deception she'd never looked for before. The calendar app sat on his tablet, left carelessly on the counter after breakfast. Margaret Whitmore's birthday. She'd seen the date on his mother's headstone during their evening walks through the estate cemetery. Her fingers moved almost without permission, entering the numbers. The calendar opened like a book of secrets. There they were, dinner appointments marked as CM scattered throughout the past month. Always on nights when he claimed to be working late. Always at restaurants she'd never heard him mention. CM could be anyone. A business partner. A client. But why the secrecy? Why the initials instead of full names like his other appointments? Her phone buzzed again. This time a photo. Grant sitting across from a stunning blonde woman at an upscale restaurant. Their heads bent close in conversation. The image quality suggested it was taken from a distance, through a window perhaps. The message that followed made her stomach drop. Still think you're special? Some contracts never really end. She recognized the woman immediately. Grant's ex-fiancée from the newspaper photos she'd found during her research. The same woman who'd betrayed his privacy, who'd driven him to seek surrogate arrangements in the first place. Yet here they were, looking intimate and familiar across a candlelit table. The phone felt heavy in her trembling hands. Another message appeared. Ask him about the real reason he chose you. Ask him what happens after the baby comes. Ask him why he needed someone who wouldn't ask questions. Each word felt like a small knife, cutting away at the trust she'd been carefully building. The modified contract sat in her bedroom drawer, still unsigned, waiting for her decision. Now she wondered if signing it would be the biggest mistake of her life. That evening, when Grant called to check on her as he did every night, she let it ring through to voicemail. Then she played the message back twice, listening to his voice with new ears, searching for lies she prayed she wouldn't find. Hey, it's me. Running late again. This merger is killing me. I'll see you in the morning for breakfast. Okay? And Araya? His voice softened. I know something's been different between us lately. We need to talk. There are things you deserve to know. The line went dead, leaving her alone with her doubts and the terrible certainty that someone was playing games with both their hearts. When she finally confronted him about the photo, his explanation should have made her feel better. Instead, it revealed something that made everything worse. He'd been protecting her from threats she didn't even know existed. The main house drawing room felt like a stage set for confrontation, with its formal furniture and family portraits watching like judges. She stood near the window, pregnancy finally showing at 5 months, while he paced like a caged animal, trying to explain his way out of a trap. You met with her behind my back. Araya's voice cracked with betrayal, the photo clutched in her fist like evidence at a trial. To tell her to leave you alone. Grant stopped pacing, running his hands through his hair. Charlotte's been calling, texting, showing up at my office. She found out about you, about the baby. She's been making threats. I'm not a child, Grant. I don't need protection. I need honesty. The words hung between them like a challenge. She'd trusted him with her body, her future, her growing feelings. But trust was supposed to flow both ways, wasn't it? What kind of threats? She pressed, hating how her voice sounded small and afraid. Grant's jaw tightened. She's claiming I violated our non-disclosure agreement by discussing our relationship with you. She's threatening to sue for damages, to drag both of us through the courts. She knows about your mother's medical bills, your financial situation. She's using it all as ammunition. The room felt smaller suddenly, the expensive furniture closing in around them. Araya sank into one of the leather chairs, her hand instinctively moving to her belly where their child grew stronger each day. So you decided to handle it yourself? To keep me in the dark while you played games with the woman who destroyed your trust in the first place. I was trying to protect you. By lying to me, the words exploded from her chest. By making me feel crazy for sensing something was wrong. By letting me think I was imagining the distance between us. Grant knelt beside her chair, his hands reaching for hers before stopping short. I never lied to you. I didn't want you to worry. The stress isn't good for the baby. The baby, she laughed bitterly. It always comes back to the baby, doesn't it? Not me, not us. Just a child you're paying me to carry. That's not fair, isn't it? She stood up abruptly, needing distance. You modified the contract, yes. You said the right words about choosing me. But when push came to shove, when your ex-fiancée started making trouble, you handled it like a business problem. You didn't trust me enough to be your partner in solving it. The space between them felt like an ocean. Grant stood slowly, his face pale in the afternoon light filtering through the tall windows. "I love you," he said quietly. "I know I've made mistakes, but I love you." "Do you?" she whispered. "Or do you love the idea of me? The grateful surrogate who asks no questions and causes no problems." Before he could answer, the front door chimed. The sound echoed through the house like a warning bell. Grant's face went white as he glanced toward the entrance hall. "Expecting someone?" Araya asked, though something in his expression already gave her the answer. The housekeeper's voice carried from the foyer. "Ms. Montgomery is here to see you, sir." Standing on the marble steps, perfectly poised and smiling like a predator, was his ex-fiancée. "Hello, darling," Charlotte said to Grant, then turned to Araya with eyes like winter. "We need to talk." His ex-fiancée didn't come to fight for Grant back. She came to destroy Araya completely, and the weapon she brought was more devastating than money or threats. It was the truth about the contract Araya had never seen. Charlotte Montgomery swept into the drawing room like she owned it, her designer heels clicking against marble with military precision. She carried a leather briefcase and the kind of confidence that came from old money and older grudges. "Charlotte, you need to leave." Grant stepped forward, his voice tight with warning. "Oh, I will," she smiled, setting her briefcase on the coffee table between the sofas. "Right after I show Araya something she deserves to see, the real contract, the one you've been hiding from her." Araya's blood turned to ice. "What are you talking about?" The living room became a battlefield, with legal documents scattered across the coffee table like evidence in a trial. Charlotte opened her briefcase with theatrical flair, pulling out a thick stack of papers bound in blue backing. "This is the original surrogacy agreement," Charlotte said, her voice honey-sweet with poison. "The one your boyfriend actually signed, not the pretty modified version he showed you to keep you happy." Grant lunged forward. "Don't." "Full custody transfers to biological father upon birth," Charlotte read aloud, her finger tracing the words like a death sentence. "With surrogate relinquishing all parental rights and contact. No visitation, no updates, no photographs. Complete termination of relationship between surrogate and child." The words hit Araya like physical blows. She sank onto the sofa, her hands trembling as she reached for the documents. There was in black and white legal language that left no room for interpretation. Grant's signature at the bottom, bold and confident. "You were never going to let me see this baby again," she whispered, looking up at Grant with eyes full of betrayal. "Even after everything between us, even after telling me you'd changed your mind." "I did change my mind," Grant started. "But you didn't change the actual contract, did you?" Charlotte interrupted, her voice sharp with triumph. "You showed her a fake modification to keep her compliant while you figured out what you really wanted." Classic Grant Whitmore, keeping his options open. Araya felt sick. The baby kicked inside her as if sensing her distress, and she pressed both hands to her belly protectively. "Is this true?" Grant's silence lasted too long. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "The lawyer said changing the custody terms would be complicated. I was working on it." "Working on it," she repeated numbly, "while letting me fall in love with you, while sleeping with me, while making me believe we had a future together. We do have a future." "Based on what?" She stood up, documents falling to the floor around her feet. "More lies? More contracts you'll modify when it's convenient? More protection I never asked for?" Charlotte gathered her papers with satisfied efficiency. "I've done what I came to do. Grant, you know where to find me when you're ready to be honest about what you really want." She paused at the door, looking back at Araya with something that might have been pity. "Honey, men like him don't change. They just get better at hiding what they've always been." The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like a coffin lid. "Araya, please." But she was already walking away, heading for the guest house to pack the few belongings she'd brought to this place. The contract might bind her legally, but her heart was suddenly, completely free. She disappeared like morning mist, leaving behind only empty spaces and the echo of what could have been. But Grant Whitmore had built an empire on never accepting defeat, and he wasn't about to start now. The guest house stood empty, but her presence lingered in every room. The book marked on page 237, the coffee mug still in the sink, the indentation on the pillow where she'd rested her head and dreamed of a different ending. Grant found the note on the kitchen counter, her nursing school handwriting careful and precise. I've returned to Birmingham to finish my degree and prepare for the baby's birth. My lawyer will contact yours regarding contract fulfillment. Please don't try to find me. We both know this was always going to end. I just wish you'd been honest about how. No accusations. No angry words. Just the quiet dignity that had first drawn him to her, now cutting deeper than any screaming match could have. His security team found her rental car at Dallas International Airport within 2 hours. She'd paid cash for a bus ticket to Birmingham, using her student ID for the discount fare. While he owned private jets and could have followed her anywhere, something in her note stopped him. She'd asked for space, and maybe, for the first time in his life, he needed to respect someone else's boundaries. The days crawled by like years. His assistant fielded calls from reporters who'd somehow caught wind of the story. His lawyers worked overtime trying to trace the leak, but Grant suspected Charlotte was feeding information to gossip columnists piece by piece, building anticipation for a bigger reveal. He threw himself into work, but numbers on spreadsheets couldn't fill the silence where her laughter used to live. The breakfast nook where she'd studied felt like a shrine to loss. Even his father noticed the change. "You look like hell, son," the old man said during one of their awkward dinners. "When you find something worth keeping, you don't let pride get in the way." "She doesn't trust me anymore, Dad." "I'm not sure she ever really did." Trust is earned, not bought. You know the difference. Your mother taught you that before she died. Maybe it's time to remember the lesson. 3 weeks after she vanished, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was a flash drive labeled "The Truth You Need to Hear" in her careful handwriting. Grant stared at it for an hour before sliding it into his computer. The screen filled with her face, tired but beautiful, sitting in what looked like a small apartment. Behind her, he could see nursing textbooks stacked on a simple table, a window looking out onto a street he didn't recognize. "If you're watching this," her recorded voice said, "then you found the drive I left with your father. He promised to make sure you got it, but only if I didn't come back on my own." She took a shaky breath. "I'm not coming back, Grant, but you deserve to know why." As the video played, Grant realized he was about to hear truths that would either destroy him completely or give him the roadmap to win her back. Her recorded message wasn't an accusation or a goodbye. It was something far more devastating. It was forgiveness, understanding, and a love confession that came too late to save them. The computer screen glowed in his darkened office, her face pixelated but beautiful, her voice steady despite the tears he could see she'd been fighting. Behind her was a small apartment, humble, clean, nothing like the luxury she'd left behind. "I want you to know that I understand," she began, her hands folded carefully in her lap. "I understand why you needed that original contract. I understand your fear of being used, of having another person you care about betray your trust for money or publicity." Grant leaned closer to the screen, memorizing every detail of her face. She looked tired, older somehow, but there was a strength in her posture that hadn't been there before. "I also understand that you probably did plan to change those custody terms eventually. Charlotte was right about one thing. You do keep your options open, but she was wrong about your reasons. You weren't being calculating. You were being careful. There's a difference." She paused, placing a protective hand over her belly where their child grew. 6 months now, he calculated. Halfway to meeting the baby he'd wanted so desperately that he'd contracted for its creation. "But here's what you need to understand about me." Her voice grew stronger. "I didn't need you to change the contract to prove you loved me. I needed you to choose me over your fear. I needed you to trust me enough to let me help you fight Charlotte, instead of handling it like a business problem you could solve alone." The apartment around her looked peaceful. Sunlight streamed through simple curtains, and he could hear birds singing outside her window. It looked like home in a way his mansion never had. "I fell in love with you, Grant. Not your money, not your protection, not even your modified contract. I fell in love with a man who helped his father with medication and listened to my dreams about becoming a nurse. I fell in love with someone who made me feel seen. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, and Grant felt his heart break cleanly in two. But love isn't enough if it comes with conditions and secrets. I can't build a life with someone who thinks love means protecting me from the truth. I need a partner, not a savior. She stood up from the chair, moving to the window. When she turned back to the camera, her face was resolute. I'm going to have this baby, and I'm going to love this child with everything I have for as long as I'm allowed to. If you want to honor the original contract terms, I'll understand. If you want to share custody, we can work something out through lawyers. But I won't beg you to choose me anymore. The video showed her moving toward the camera, reaching to turn it off. But she paused, looking directly into the lens with eyes that held all the love and loss between them. If you want to find me, don't look for the desperate girl who signed your contract. Look for the person I really am. I volunteer at the Birmingham Community Clinic on Oak Street every Tuesday and Thursday morning. If you come as yourself. Not as Grant Whitmore, CEO, just as the man I fell in love with. The screen went black, leaving him alone with the weight of everything he'd lost and the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to earn it back. He found her exactly where she said he would. Not hiding, but healing others, because that's who she'd always been underneath the desperate circumstances that brought them together. The Birmingham Community Clinic buzzed with activity on Thursday morning. Mothers holding babies, elderly patients waiting for appointments, volunteers moving with purposeful energy through the cramped but cheerful space. Grant had traded his usual tailored suit for jeans and a simple button-down shirt, but he still felt overdressed among the community he'd never bothered to understand. And there she was, 7 months pregnant now, her belly round and obvious beneath a volunteer t-shirt, helping a young mother fill out paperwork with the same gentle patience she'd shown his father. Her hair was different, shorter, more practical, and she wore no makeup. She looked more beautiful than he remembered. He stood in the doorway watching her work, afraid to interrupt, afraid she'd see him and run. A little girl with pigtails tugged on Araya's shirt, whispering something that made her laugh, a sound he'd missed more than his next breath. "Can I help you?" An older woman approached him, her expression wary. The clinic director, he guessed, protective of her volunteers and clients. "I'm looking for Araya Monroe," he said quietly. "And you are?" Before he could answer, Araya looked up from the paperwork. Their eyes met across the crowded waiting room, and the world went silent except for the sound of his heartbeat in his ears. She said something to the young mother, then walked over slowly, one hand supporting her back in the way pregnant women do. Up close, he could see the changes 7 months had brought. The fullness in her face, the way she moved with careful dignity, the wariness in eyes that used to look at him with trust. Grant. His name sounded strange in her mouth, formal and distant. "Hello, Araya." The clinic director hovered nearby, clearly ready to intervene if needed. Other volunteers had stopped their work to watch the drama unfolding in their safe space. "What are you doing here?" Araya asked. Grant's prepared speech evaporated. All the words he'd practiced during the 4-hour drive from Dallas disappeared under the weight of seeing her again. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. "I came to give you this." She took the papers with trembling fingers, unfolding them slowly. As she read, her face went white. "Termination of parental rights," she whispered. You're giving up the baby?" The waiting room had gone completely quiet. Even the children seemed to sense the importance of the moment. "I'm choosing you," Grant said, his voice carrying clearly through the silence. "Not the baby, not the heir, not the legacy my family expects. Just you." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she clutched the document. "Grant, you can't." He dropped to one knee right there in the crowded clinic waiting room, ignoring the gasps and whispers around them. "I love you, Araya Monroe. Not because you're carrying my child, not because you fit some idea I had about what I needed. I love you because you make me want to be better than I am." The clinic director stepped forward. "Sir, this isn't appropriate." "It's okay, Mrs. Johnson," Araya said softly, never taking her eyes off Grant's face. "Let him talk. I was wrong about everything," he continued. "Wrong to think I could control love like a business deal. Wrong to keep secrets to protect you. Wrong to think you needed saving instead of seeing that you were strong enough to save me." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, and the waiting room collectively held its breath. 2 years later, they proved that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the end of the contract and the start of choice. The renovated Birmingham Community Clinic bore a simple plaque beside its entrance: the Araya Whitmore Center for Women's Health, funded by Dallas money but built on Birmingham love, a testament to what happens when privilege meets purpose. Inside the bright, expanded facility, a toddler with Grant's dark hair and Araya's intelligent eyes played quietly in the corner of the main office, building towers with colorful blocks while his parents worked side by side at adjoining desks. "Marcus, baby, use your inside voice," Araya called gently as their son squealed with delight at his architectural achievements. At 2 years old, he had his father's determination and his mother's stubborn streak, a combination that kept them both on their toes. Grant looked up from the budget reports he was reviewing, watching his wife sort through patient files with the same careful attention she'd once given her nursing textbooks. She'd finished her degree 6 months after Marcus was born, graduating at the top of her class while managing new motherhood with characteristic grace. "The medical supply order came in under budget this month," he reported, leaning back in his chair. "We can approve the dental clinic expansion. Dr. Martinez will be thrilled," she smiled, making a note in her planner. Her waiting list is getting longer every week. They'd married in this very room 18 months ago, surrounded by patients, volunteers, and community members who become family. No society photographers, no elaborate reception, just simple vows that meant everything because they were freely given. Grant had kept his word about the parental rights termination. He'd legally given up all claim to Marcus, then immediately petitioned to adopt him as Araya's husband. The paperwork was complicated, but the message was clear: this child existed because of love, not contracts. "Remember when you thought I was just a desperate girl looking for money?" Araya teased, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "And you thought I was just another rich man trying to buy what I wanted?" He replied, bringing her fingers to his lips. "We were both right and both completely wrong." Their wedding rings caught the afternoon light streaming through the windows. Simple gold bands that had replaced the elaborate engagement ring he'd first offered. She'd chosen them from a local jewelry store, insisting that symbols of their love should come from the community they now served together. Marcus abandoned his blocks and toddled over to climb into Grant's lap, chattering in the mixed language of toddlerhood about his day at the clinic's childcare center. Grant gathered his son close, still amazed that this little person existed not because of money or contracts, but because two stubborn people had learned to choose love over fear. "So what would you choose?" Araya asked, echoing the question she'd posed in her video message 2 years ago. Security with conditions or love with risks? Grant looked at his wife, his son, the life they built together from the ashes of broken contracts and damaged trust. "I choose this," he said simply. "Every single time, I choose this." Outside the clinic windows, Birmingham bustled with afternoon life. The community that had welcomed him not as a wealthy savior, but as a man learning to love without conditions. And in this small corner of Alabama, the Whitmore legacy continued not through inherited wealth or corporate empires, but through the simple act of caring for others. The most powerful contracts, they'd learned, aren't written on paper. They're written on hearts that choose each other again and again, one day at a time. If this story moved you, smash that like button and subscribe for more stories about love that transforms instead of love that just purchases. Comment below about the most important choice you've ever made for love. What would you have done in Araya's shoes? Would you have trusted Grant's grand gesture or walked away forever? And remember, the most powerful love doesn't rescue you from your life. It recognizes the strength that's been there all along. The best relationships aren't built on contracts or conditions, but on the daily choice to see and value each other exactly as you are. Drop a heart in the comments if you believe real love is about choice, not chance. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they're worth choosing every single day. Until next time, keep believing in love that liberates instead of love that limits.